I'm Lynn Tomeo, and I'll be moderating today's event, A Problem-Solving Approach to Cognitive Rehab. Bancroft is pleased to offer educational opportunities such as our Heads Up webinar series, designed to give brain injury professionals the opportunity to gain new insights from our clinical experts, while at the same time earning educational credits. Today's webinar is credentialed by CCMC for Nurse Case Managers and CRCC for Certified Rehab Counselors for 1 CEU. General attendance certificates will also be given for 1 clocked hour. Our presenter today is Dr. Karen Lindgren. Dr. Lindgren is a senior neuropsychologist for Bancroft Brain Injury Rehabilitation's Day Treatment Services. She's a licensed psychologist with 15 years of experience in neuropsychological assessment and treatment of brain injury. She has clinical affiliations with the graduate programs at Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and Immaculata University. Dr. Lindgren has written articles and presented information in the area of neurological development, neuropsychological assessment, neurotoxic exposure, and interdisciplinary treatment of brain injury. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the chat area located on the side of your screen. We'll address questions at the end of the presentation. Before tomorrow, you'll receive a brief survey via email, which will enable you to receive a certificate for today's participation. So thank you all again for joining us, and now I'll turn the event over to Dr. Lindgren.
Thank you, Lynn. As Lynn said, my name is Karen Lindgren, and I'm the senior neuropsychologist at Bancroft Brain Injury Services, which is a residential and day treatment and outpatient program for individuals who've sustained a brain injury located in New Jersey. Today I'm going to be talking about problem solving. Our goals for today are to define problem solving, including the cognitive skills utilized, and relate this skill set to community participation. The emphasis will be on how to teach this skill set to others. Today I'll be using the terms brain injury to refer to traumatic brain injury, which is cerebral damage that occurs after birth and is not directly related to a developmental disorder or progressive damaging of the brain. Traumatic brain injury refers to a specific form of acquired brain injury that is the result of a sudden trauma. Cerebral damage from brain injury results in a host of physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral symptoms. I've listed some of the most common symptoms here on the slide as examples. For example, physical symptoms may include headache, sleep, and fatigue. Common cognitive symptoms include memory, language, concentration, and processing speed issues. Changes in emotional processing are also common. In addition, related to the neurology involved in the brain injury and related to significant difficulty coping with the secondary stressors related to change in life brought about by a brain injury. Physical, cognitive, and emotional changes combine to produce changes in behavior, impulsiveness, behavioral outbursts, or withdrawal and isolation are common changes following a brain injury. While I've listed these symptoms out, in reality, cognitive symptoms are extremely complex and intertwined, so that symptoms can be the result of various processes. Translating a cognitive symptom or complaint into its origin can be very difficult. So for example, let's look at what's meant by a memory problem. Here I have an individual who's come in to me and told me that they have difficulty remembering their doctor's appointments. Difficulty remembering doctor's appointments can be the result of many different processes, and I need to examine the complaint in detail to understand what the contributing factors were. So for example, we have to examine how the complaint occurred. Was it the result of distractions, either external distractions, a busy doctor's office, or internal distractions, the result of anxiety or depression regarding having to make the doctor's appointments? Was there poor attention in making the appointment or slowed processing? The person making the appointments was speaking too quickly to them and they weren't able to process the information. Did the person have difficulty encoding, retrieving, or understanding the information? Or finally, was it difficulty with cognitively organizing medical appointments into a framework, that is executive dysfunction? As noted earlier, emotion processing can also be affected by a brain injury. Again, just like in cognitive symptoms, multiple pathways can lead to either flattened or amplified emotional expression. Cognitive symptoms such as visual perceptual difficulties, understanding facial expression, tone of voice, or executive dysfunction are common contributors to emotional dysfunction. These symptoms all interact, resulting in changed behaviors. If you add into this complex symptom picture the fact that individuals with brain injuries actually are dealing with very complex environments, you can understand that the likelihood of experiencing symptoms increases. Overload is a concept that reflects taxing resources in a complex environment. And overload is a concept experienced actually by all of us at some times, probably just about every day, and refers to when we feel like we have too much going on and we are driven to simplify problems and enact quick solutions to resolve that feeling of overload. Overload is brought on by large crowds, lots of noise, or too much information presented quickly. There's a true sensory dimension to overload. So if an individual is in a crowded environment or one where the lights are very bright or the noise level is high, they could experience cognitive overload. This results in an inability to process external environments, physical fatigue, and a concomitant rise in emotions. These cognitive and emotional symptoms can affect quality of life. In fact, research indicates that life satisfaction appears to steadily decline after an individual experiences a brain injury. And this decline is not necessarily related to injury severity, which is not correlated with measures of life satisfaction. So what does correlate with quality of life? Well, several variables have been shown to correlate with quality of life, including marital status, problem-solving ability, and executive functioning, which are key factors related to quality of life in this group. So problem solving is actually one component of executive functioning, and let's talk a little bit about what executive functioning is. Executive dysfunction is a symptom that has been repeatedly seen and documented in acquired brain injury and is reported as one of the most common difficulties facing this population. Executive functioning is well researched, and it's much debated regarding its definition and what skills particularly fall under the general heading of executive functioning. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to use the term executive functioning to refer to the integration of several cognitive skills people require to adapt to novel situations and pursue their life goals, which include such skills as planning, initiation, and regulation. Executive function is very complicated partly because by its definition, executive functioning integrates multiple skills. What our executive functions help us do is help us understand our physical feelings, our emotional processing, and our cognitive processing simultaneously to enact solutions to situations that we encounter daily. As related to quality of life, executive dysfunction has been implicated with poor social outcomes following traumatic brain injury. Research with rehabilitation populations found that poor executive functioning is also strongly correlated with poor work adjustment. So by these two pieces of evidence, we recognize that executive function is a critical area for rehabilitation providers to address and can predict success in the community following a brain injury. Why is that? So why is executive functioning such a strong predictor of quality of life? Components of executive function actually help us understand, adapt, and respond to our environments. And what executive functioning actually does is help us to promote complex problem solving and manage our life stressors. Research has found a significant relationship between problem-solving ability and various forms of psychological well-being. Specifically, how well we solve problems helps moderate our relationship between the stress we experience in our life, environmental stress, and the distress we experience internally, internal distress. Problem solving, we encounter big and small problems on a daily basis. Things like hitting traffic on the way to work, or needing to make a last-minute schedule change, or not feeling well, are all problems that we manage pretty much without thinking about it on a daily basis. People who've suffered brain injuries also face a large variety of significant problems in their day-to-day life, including typical stressors that we all experience, waking up late, running late for an appointment, as well as problems brought on by having sustained a brain injury. The cognitive skills that they may have used pre-injury to cope with problems may have been compromised by their injury. We've listed two here for emotional control, which makes it difficult for people to tolerate problems long enough to generate a solution. And difficulty in executive functioning may make it difficult to generate alternative solutions. But there's a host of other cognitive skills we use to solve problems, including memory, language skills, and visual perceptual skills. All of these symptoms increase the importance of social problem-solving skills for individuals who have sustained a brain injury. So let's talk specifically about the rehabilitation problem-solving skill. When I talk about problem-solving skill, there's two very key important components. There's one, the skill involved. Does an individual have the ability to understand a problem, create and implement a solution? And the social problem-solving style, which refers to their psychological capacity to approach problems in a positive manner. While both of these skills are critical in successful problem solving, today I'm going to be focusing on the first piece, rehabilitating problem-solving skill. Stay tuned because we hope to have another webinar which would address social problem-solving orientation and how to work with people on their approach to problem solving in a later webinar. Okay. So there are many resources which address problem solving. If you start to look in the literature, you'll recognize that rehabilitation professionals take problem solving very, very seriously, and there's lots of great resources out there on how to implement cognitive rehabilitation for problem solving. I want to just kind of turn your attention to three very general but very important references. The first is the Cognitive Rehabilitation Manual, which was developed recently by the Brain Injury Interdisciplinary Special Interest Group of ACRM, and the editor there is Dr. Haskins. And they have in a very detailed way spelled out how to address executive dysfunction. Other really great resources are Solberg and Tuckstra's Optimizing Cognitive Rehabilitation, and the Nezu book is a great introduction to problem-solving orientation. So I would encourage you to consider these resources as you work with individuals with brain injuries. If you look at ACRM's Brain Injury Interdisciplinary Special Interest Research Group, they have two evidence-based recommendations for the rehabilitation of executive dysfunction. The first is they recommend metacognitive strategy training as a practice standard for rehabilitation of executive dysfunctioning. So what that means is that they recommend that after traumatic brain injury, it is a standard of practice that everybody receive some form of metacognitive strategy training if they are amenable to receiving it. The second recommendation based on the literature is a practice guideline, which is training in formal problem-solving strategies during post-acute rehabilitation. And that's going to be the recommendation that we're really going to be talking about in a lot of detail. So as you start to approach problem-solving with the clients that you're working with, the very first question you might have is who's appropriate for problem-solving training. And there's two important things to evaluate. First, you have to consider an individual's ability to identify problem-solving as a goal area. They should be aware that difficulties in solving problems are a barrier to effective community participation. If not, that may be to the point you want to enter in on with your treatment. The second consideration is how well is an individual able to use environmental support versus internalized strategy. Can they benefit from external feedback, or can they use internal strategies such as mnemonic devices to solve problems and to implement these solutions? So what do we do to foster effective problem solving? Again, there's two main areas: problem orientation, which we will not be addressing, and then there's problem solving skill. In teaching people problem solving skills, there are very standard general areas to address. Both the psychological style as in problem solving orientation and problem solving skill. In skill, we address an individual's ability to define a problem, plan and generate alternatives, make decisions, implement the solution that they decided on, and check to see how well that decision worked. These skills are very well established in the research. If you start to read the problem-solving literature, what you'll see is that while there are many different mnemonic strategies to remember the steps to problem solving, all of the solutions include these key components: definition, planning, decision-making, implementing, and evaluating. For example, the goal, plan, do, and review method is a mnemonic technique that's used to remember these steps. In orienting individuals to problem-solving training, it's important to teach the steps in a very highly structured way, each time consistently using the exact same language each time, and gradually fade support. Initially, therapists should be providing maximum support at each step of the problem, and then back up gradually with a goal for the clients to implement the solution independently. The first step of problem-solving training can easily be overlooked, and that is problem definition. The very first question that we work with clients on is there a problem? It may seem as common sense to us that we are able to recognize problems when they occur, but after a brain injury, cognitive changes may mean that people don't recognize problems when they occur. So teaching the client signs of a problem, for example, are they having an emotional change? Do they feel sad? And you may need to work with the client on how they recognize if they feel sad or angry. Are they upset? Has someone given them feedback or seems to be reacting differently to them? These things can signal that that problem has occurred. Once it has been identified that a problem has occurred, the second step is helping the client define problem. And for this, the remainder of the presentation, I'll be using the example of a client who came to me with the problem that they didn't have enough money. That was what they identified as the problem. Well, not having enough money can actually represent multiple problems. It could represent a skill deficit. That is the person misplacing their money or losing it? Are they overly impulsive with their spending? Do they not have the skill to budget money? It could represent an interpersonal challenge. They're dependent on others for money, and that person's not giving them the money that they need. Or it could represent a vocational concern. The person needs a job and isn't able to get one and therefore is short on money. So when I worked with this person, we identified don't have money really meant that they had a vocational concern. Having a vocational concern now leads to another whole line of problem definition. We still haven't defined the problem. Are they able to locate jobs? Are they able to apply for jobs? Are they able to interview for jobs? All of those things represented potential new problems to resolve. When you're working with a client to help define a problem, work with the individual to seek all available facts about a problem and to define these facts in clear, objective terms with a minimal emotional content. This happens frequently in interpersonal problems. People will say, for instance, if this problem was they needed money from a family member, they'll identify anger or depression as the problem, when the problem really is they need to be able to negotiate with their family member. They need to put it in very objective terms, separating facts from assumptions. So in the first step of our problem, locating a job, we need to consider what types of jobs could the person do, what were transportation possibilities, would the person potentially experience fatigue if deciding on a job was the right way to go, and what supports do they have. The goal of problem definition is to set realistic goals to resolve the problem. Okay. How do we work with the clients to do this? First of all, to help the client identify the problem in more objective terms, encourage the person to work on problem outside of their own mind. Taking notes and working problems out on paper is really critical for every step of problem solving. When possible, help the client visualize solutions, both the implementation and the results of their solutions, so they could walk through the steps in their minds, and help them break large problems down into smaller pieces. To address the emotional component of problem solving, teach techniques that will help the individual tolerate the emotional arousal associated with working with social problems. Yawning, smiling, and other behavioral stress management are really good skills. On our team, cognitive therapy works very closely with neuropsychology to be able to implement these solutions in terms of real-world problems. As I noted, it is critical to write every step of problem solving down on paper and to teach the client to use a worksheet. So in our very first step, defining the problem, we use a worksheet in which we have the client identify the date and what is the goal. And initially, my client wrote her goal as to obtain a part-time job for 10 to 15 hours per week. Utilizing the techniques I just described, though, I encouraged her to think of potential other goals, because this goal and what would follow from it is very different than this goal, which would be to reduce her spending by $25 per week, which is also very different from this goal, to ask a family member to supplement her income by $25 per week. So once we identified 3 potential goals for 3 potential problems, the client should begin planning to solve these problems. At this stage, the cognitive therapist works with the individual to brainstorm and expand options prior to evaluating and implementing. One of the common problems we see in brain injury is that a person may decide on a solution to a problem very quickly and then have difficulty being flexible with that solution. At this stage, we still want to expand the flexibility in thinking for the client. So in the planning stage, we're considering what are my options, what are my resources, and what are barriers. In our example, and then using those things, we decide, do I need to change my goal? So in our example about money, a client might be encouraged to consider other ways of earning money and potential limitations to this solution. As you think through this in detail, you encourage the client to consider changing or deciding on a different goal. Once 2 or more potential solutions are decided, it's time to make a decision about implementing one. And so the goal of decision-making, the decision-making stage, is to maximize the positive consequences and minimize negative consequences. It's critical to help clients understand that no decision is perfect. In the example above, the client had to consider potential fatigue from utilizing its impact on rehabilitation therapies, transportation costs, and the cognitive energy against the potential benefits of this. And so in decision making, it's really important to make a formal pros and cons chart, recognizing that every solution has both potential benefits and potential costs associated with it. No solution is perfect. So the client listed out the pros and the cons here. And the pros for working was that she'd feel independent. She'd feel that her career was restarting again after having had a loss. She'd be back out into the community and meeting people. Notice that those pros are really psychological benefits to her, that it was important to her feeling of self-worth to be able to work again. However, she recognized that there were some cons associated with that solution. Fatigue, the cost associated, mobility concerns, and a decreased ability to focus on her rehabilitation would be potential cons. So I encouraged her to consider another solution. And the solution that she really wanted to consider as a second solution was to be asking a family member for financial assistance. Now, the major con to this was feelings of dependency, relying on her family member. However, what she did recognize is that it would be an easy thing to try, to do, and to implement, and if it didn't work, she could move to working as a secondary goal. And it would enable her to focus on rehabilitation. So in this decision-making process, she actually ended up changing her goal, and she decided to solve the problem. She'd ask her sister to help her by giving her $25 per week. Once that was decided, we needed to develop a plan to reach this goal. The plan should be as detailed as necessary and should address resources and barriers, including social, environmental, financial, cognitive, and psychological resources and barriers, and should be extremely detailed. Who, when, where, what. Every aspect of the plan should be laid out. As we all know, that even when you engage in this process and plan something out very detailed, there are always potential last-minute changes that require flexibility. So one of the key things to teach at this stage is to help the person anticipate potential barriers and problems. What are backup plans? Is there a safety net? For example, if you're working with clients on achieving independent transportation to a doctor's appointment, what happens if the bus doesn't show up? What happens if the person I'm counting for on a ride is late? What are the things I need to do at that moment to solve the problem? In as detailed a way as possible, I would need to call the doctor's office. I would need to make an alternative plan to get there, etc. So you're including these resources and barriers in detail for each step. So in our example that I was using about our client, she planned to ask her sister to meet her at an apartment, and she had to decide a lot of things in regard to make this occur. She had to decide the optimal time, the place, what she would be doing in the apartment. Did she want to have the sister for dinner? And she used all of these things to put it into a worksheet. So once she had her plan, she listed out the steps. Her plan was to ask her sister for $25 per week. The first thing we did was identify what she would need to explain her financial situation to her sister. We went through her budget in detail. We went through her planner to show what her week was like in detail. And we looked at bank statements. It was also critical at this point for her to understand her own spending patterns so she could relay those to her sister and take her sister's feedback. So when there was money that seemed to be spent that we weren't sure what it was spent on, we needed to be able to explain that money and why it was necessary. So this training and planning, like training and problem identification and training decision making, can take weeks and weeks of sessions as you go through this in extreme detail. For my client, what she did was she identified the steps to ask to meet with her sister and identified evening as a preferred time. And then she decided she was going to present her budget and problems with expenses, her expenses consistently exceeding her income. And I worked with her, and we really did recognize that she was in a situation of limited financial capacity, and her expenses really did consistently exceed her income. And the danger here was that she was going to, without some interference, she was going to find herself with growing debt. So the client needed to anticipate all possible outcomes. This is a difficult step, and this is difficult for all of us to do. Typically, we don't consider all possible outcomes when we do problem solving, but it is important in order for the client to develop safety nets for them to identify challenges, resources at each step, and what might happen. So we included options to offer to work for the sister, to plan for the sister's emotional reaction, and in turn the client's emotional reaction to that, and what would we do if the sister said she was unable to help or needed more time. So we planned all of those out and wrote notes for each of those. You know, the key here too is making this part of the larger rehabilitation goal. In working with the client, your goal is not just to resolve one problem, but the larger rehabilitation goal for this client was for her to manage her emotional response to unexpected situations and for her to independently recognize problems and implement solutions. So at each stage, the cognitive therapist is also linking this strategy to a larger rehabilitation goal, which will be linked to independence. So once a plan is developed, it's time for us to implement. Implementation occurs, oops, I skipped a slide, sorry about that. The other thing I just wanted to add is that in identifying the plan, the first step of the plan, the client identified her very small details, like is she going to have snacks, is she going to have staff in the apartment or staff nearby for support, did she need some cues from staff if she appeared to be getting upset, and what is going to happen if the sister is really busy or preoccupied and not able to respond to her emotionally right then. We actually worked with the residential staff there to detail exactly how staff should be checking in on her so that she felt that she had the safety net. Okay, so once the plan is developed, it's time to implement. Solution implementation and verification refers to your ability to check each step of the plan to make sure it's going according to how you planned. Implementation should proceed as slowly as possible, increasing opportunities for feedback, and more importantly, increasing the mindfulness and the person's ability to process that feedback. Decreased processing speed, I noted as a common side effect or symptom following a brain injury. This means that implementation of problem-solving strategies can be a very, very slow process. We work with neuropsychology to make sure the client has some mindfulness strategies, is aware of what they're thinking and feeling at each step to be able to identify perhaps a new problem is going on or perhaps I need to implement a safety net solution. Pausing to check how the step is going also allows clients time to put their emotions in check. They can check their emotions, they can check their plan, and finally make some changes if needed. So each step of this plan, the client is asking themselves questions. How am I doing? What am I feeling? Do I need to make a change? These are things that we do very unconsciously when we solve problems and are not really aware of. And what the therapist is basically doing is making each step of that problem-solving strategy very explicit. The other thing that's really important to work with clients on is rather than considering goals as an all or nothing success, client should identify aspects of the plan that worked and aspects that didn't work. For example, in this situation, presenting the budget to the sister was effective, but the sister was not able to commit to the full amount of money. However, what did work is that her process of presenting her budget and her expenses to the sister helped her in several ways. First, it helped her sister see her as more independent, which was a psychological goal for this client. Secondly, it actually helped the sister really understand her financial situation and recognize that without intervention, the client was going down a path towards increased debt. In addition, the client was successful in managing her emotions, which we linked to the larger rehabilitation plan. Secondly, what didn't work is just as critical as what worked. In reality, when we solve problems, we implicitly understand what we didn't work. For example, me yelling at that person didn't get the solution I wanted, and adjust our reaction the next time we encounter that problem. So working with the client to understand what didn't work in a very objective, emotion-free way is a way for them to expand their problem-solving repertoire. This is basically a teaching opportunity for metacognition. So for the person to understand how their reactions and the way they think about things can contribute to effective or not effective problem solving. So in considering how did I do, we utilize a Likert rating scale, a 5-point scale, which allows for more subtle interpretation and really does send the message that problem solutions are not all or nothing. Secondly, we have the client write down how did they feel, and often at various stages of the problem, before this implementation, during the implementation, after implementation. What did I do well? Expanding on the strengths of the client that they have. Finally, we can help clients consider what would I change, and this is critical for people to start conceptualizing internal changes as well as external changes. When you first start asking people what they change, usually what they would change is the solution. You know, I'd win the lottery, or I'd get my sister to give me $50 a week, and that would change the problem and change the solution. But really, what we want to help them do is to focus on the internal. I might consider, for instance, in this situation, the sister, she might have considered offering to put in some work for the sister once or twice a month, doing some household chores or something to help earn the money. Having the person consider internal factors which would lead to change increases a person's perception and understanding of their control over the solution. Okay. So we've just covered these 5 basic steps: problem definition, planning and generating alternatives, decision-making, solution implementation, verification of feedback. These steps should be utilized in the same manner every time to walk the client through the process. As I mentioned earlier, what's critical is that you actually label each step, use a worksheet for each step, have the client write and fill out information, or you write and record if there's motor problems or language problems that prevents the writing, and making a record of the problems that the client can keep and refer back to, because you'll find that is very fruitful material as you go forward in helping the client solve future problems. So we recommend that you implement the worksheets consistently every time, written ways, and help the client memorize steps. This is where mnemonic techniques such as goal, plan, do, review is really helpful, because it's an easy series of steps for someone to monitor, and they can check back as to what step they're on and what step comes next. The other thing you need to do is apply this to both new and real situations and therapeutic constructed situations. So in session, you'd like to be able to construct some problems that helps the client utilize this strategy and walk through the steps. This involves both problems that are personal to the client, such as financial problems or vocational problems or interpersonal problems, but also modeling, finding problems that may occur in the world. If you hear problems on the news, or if there's problems that the department that the person's in is experiencing, to help them use this strategy each and every time to show that it can be applied to a variety of problems across a variety of situations. Finally, the other really therapeutic aspect of this process is developing metacognition. As I refer to, the BI-ISIG group recommends metacognitive training as a practice standard following a brain injury. And metacognition is the ultimate goal of cognitive therapy, because metacognition will be what enables the person to utilize strategies and implement strategies independently. So when you're dealing with problems, you're dealing with a highly emotionally charged process. And it's easy for people to overlook their strengths. So you want to begin by building on the client's strengths. The fact that they're participating in this and they're motivated to solve problems is a strength. And then help them identify the challenges. What could they do differently? It's important to identify the challenges that are both related to having sustained a brain injury. For example, a person may identify memory as a challenge, and the cognitive therapist can then use that insight as an ability to work with the person to record information. But it's also important to normalize challenges and to help clients recognize that when all of us solve problems, we all experience challenges, and problems don't always work out well for all of us. That just because we address problems well and thoroughly doesn't mean we'll get the solution that we want. As you begin to address problem solving, what you really become acutely aware of is that problems occur around us all of the time, every day, in all of our lives, and really any situation is appropriate for problem solving skill development. While it is important to teach this and teach the generalization of the skill, you may consider targeting one area at a time and only address problems surrounding, for example, medical or vocational or budgeting issues. An area that we target frequently in our programs are problem solving around interpersonal issues, because we really find that this tends to be one of the major barriers to successful community integration. Okay. And then, just as you can identify problems all the time, you can implement, target the problem-solving strategy in your sessions first. Teach these steps and give one-to-one support in the real situation. And then help the client anticipate modified situations with one-to-one support. So in session, go through the problem in detail, explain how you're going to be there for every step of the way. Then what if one aspect of the problem changes or something unexpected happens? How will you be there for that? Out of session is also critical initially to give maximum support. What you don't want to happen is to have the client fail in this process right out the gate and then feel like this process is going to lead to failure, or help the client further avoid problems. In community situations, it's important to fade our support gradually, but not our focus. And what I mean by that is we continue to focus on implementation of problem solving in the community, in sessions, with as much support as we possibly need. So when a client addresses a problem with us, we go through the steps and the problems, encourage review of each step in session, and then let the client go into the community slowly and gradually by themselves to implement the solution and come back and check. Like I mentioned earlier, it's important to develop strategies to address related cognitive challenges, like, for example, internal-external strategies for memory. And then the other thing that's really important in all of this is modeling We should attempt to utilize many of the problem-solving strategies when faced with challenging problems from persons served. We do this frequently in our day program in group. We get a complaint about the behavior of a person served. We walk through the problem-solving strategies with them so that they can understand how we go about addressing problems as a team. And modeling this also helps reinforce the importance and the effectiveness of it. And during that processes, we always allow clients to brainstorm any potential solutions, but then to consider all possible pros and cons to those solutions. Okay. So that's the end of the formal presentation. I don't know if there are some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lindgren. Yes, we do have a few questions. The first one is, can you expand on the role of emotional processing in problem solving?
Sure. So like I've been alluding to throughout this presentation, skill is critical in problem solving, but in reality, it's our emotional reactions to problem solving that predicts whether or not we will actually implement those solutions. And we've all had the experience of wanting to avoid a problem. We evidence that by procrastination or by feeling an increase in anxiety around problems or potentially by impulsively acting to resolve the problem. And those are problems, that emotional reaction is a component that should be addressed in brain injury as well as the problem-solving skill. So I think we hope to probably do another webinar later that will address how you do that.
Okay. All right. And
do you want me to go ahead and?
we have, well, this next question is interesting. Have we used technology as an aid in problem solving? So, for example, iPad, communication devices, maybe GPS.
Yes.
With your client who you discussed as an example of maybe electronic banking.
Yes. Technology is interwoven throughout of this, and with technology, it's really important also to evaluate a client's skill in this. So there's different ways to use technology. One is to use technology as potential solutions. So in this case, for example, you're right, the banking or using online banking accounts to track finances or giving the sister access, if it were appropriate, to the bank account to see the finances might be a solution. But we also use technology with our cognitive therapists, particularly when we're doing our home and community work, because the cognitive therapist actually can't be there to help implement the solution on a day-to-day basis. So we use things like email check-ins, texts, or phone calls to help monitor a person's solution to their problem and how well they're doing.
And another question, can you give examples of in-session practice tasks that might be related to problem solving?
That's a good question. So while I've emphasized in this presentation the importance of addressing real-world problems and doing very concrete problem-solving strategies for issues that the client is facing, the other thing that therapists can do is help clients expand their ability to solve problems creatively through brainstorming exercises. So if there's not an active problem you're working on with your clients, you can do things like play some of the games that are out there that encourage brainstorming bizarre solutions to problems. You can also take problems that are not directly the clients, and may never be directly the clients, and help them teach somebody else how to go through the steps of problem solving. And what that does is help also encourage empathy. The final thing that's really a great exercise is to help them take the opposite problem and solve that. So in this case, I could have had my client solve the problem from the sister's perspective. The problem the sister's having is that she has a sister who's heading towards debt and she doesn't have the resources to help the sister out. How could she solve the problem? And again, that encourages empathy. looks like there's...
Okay, and I see another question that just came up. You mentioned problem behaviors in day program. Do you use functional assessments to help in the problem-solving strategies?
Absolutely. Problems are complex, like I mentioned, and it takes a team to solve them. So including a behavioral point of view in the team is really important, and a functional assessment would help the team understand what are some of the underlying issues behind the problem. For instance, is the person having difficulty paying attention because they're feeling overload, or they feeling that they're not getting access to the things that they want? And to help narrow our definition of the problem, or functional analysis or assessment of the problem is really critical. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, and one last question. We'll close the questions for after this. Does identifying one problem often lead to the discovery of a separate and independent problem?
Yes, and actually what you'll find is one of the most therapeutic pieces of problem solving is helping to define the problem. Like in this situation, the client's continual concern that she didn't have enough money actually led to a host of other problems that needed to be addressed. And that's sort of what I say is that once you start to recognize the importance of problem solving in people's daily lives, what you'll see that problem solving is something that we're actually implementing consistently everywhere, every day. It looks like there is one more question. Should I have time to? Yeah, I'll just kind of read it. It says, I also work with adults with traumatic brain injury. Specifically, there's an individual who requires many prompts to complete shower skills. This seems to be focused on the error of response latency. Can a functional assessment be used for this? Does Bancroft have BCBA for TBI individuals? I need to not do that. Sorry, everybody. BCBA for, yes. So we incorporate functional behavior analysis. We actually have a publication I hope coming out soon regarding that, in terms of using functional behavior analysis to analyze what the components of the task are and identify what the problem is. What's really critical in our functional behavior analysis, when we do behavioral plans, we work very closely with neuropsychology to identify the role of cognitive factors. So an individual who requires many prompts to complete shower skills, we could be looking at many different problems, including initiation problems, memory problems, forgetting what the task is, motor problems, skill deficit in being able to complete that task. We may be looking at emotional concerns. Does the person need support in the shower? Now they have to have a staff nearby, and there's some anxiety regarding that. So getting the team involved, both neuropsychology, cog therapy, and behavior analysis, is critical to come up with a solution that's really effective. And while that's putting some resources out at front, what you see is that by really getting a good analysis of the problem, you come up with an effective solution much more quickly, and then the problem doesn't continue on for as long as it does.
Terrific. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lindgren, and thank you all for participating in today's Heads Up webinar. We hope you found it informative. And next month, Dr. Mary Brownsberger will present the benefits of mindfulness-based treatment for survivors of brain injury. And you can watch for details about this series and all of Bancroft's programs by following us on Twitter at Bancroft.org or liking us on Facebook. And if you have any questions about today's webinar or any future events, you can contact me at 856-616-6454 or at email lynn.tomeo@bancroft.org. So again, thank you for attending today, and have a great day.